What actually happens after a colony becomes independent? And what in the world is post-colonialism anyway? These aren't just fancy academic terms. They're ideas that have shaped and are still shaping pretty much everything around us. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the foundation. What even is colonialism? Then we'll put it side by side with imperialism to see the difference. After that, we'll jump to its modern-day legacy, which is neo-colonialism. Then we'll dig into what that post in post-colonial really means. And finally, we'll look at post-colonialism as a kind of critical lens that helps us see the whole picture more clearly. All right, first things first. Before we can even begin to talk about what came after, we've got to have a really solid idea of what colonialism itself actually was. So at its very core, colonialism really boils down to two things: settlement and exploitation. We're talking about that historical period where European powers went out and established a physical presence, settlements, governments, in places all over the world. But let's be clear, this wasn't some peaceful migration. It was a process built on taking land and resources from the people who already lived there, all for the benefit of the colonizing country. And this whole system wasn't just about military might. It was way more complex. It really operated on three main levels. First, you had the obvious one: direct governance. European administrators were literally running the show. Second, and this is fascinating, you had the academic side of it, the study of native cultures by European scholars. It was a way of categorizing and, in a way, controlling them intellectually. And third, there was this massive project of cultural transformation, trying to reshape entire societies through things like missionary work and Western education. Okay, this brings us to a spot where a lot of people get tripped up. We hear the words colonialism and imperialism thrown around like they mean the same thing, but they don't. One is the practice, and the other is the big idea behind it. So imperialism is the engine. It's the ideology that drives colonialism forward. It's that core belief, that ambition, that a nation should extend its power and influence all over the globe. Think of it as the theory, the grand strategy, the justification for the whole project. So you can think of it like this. Colonialism is the boots on the ground. It's the actual physical act of settling a place, setting up a government, and running it. It's direct control. Imperialism, on the other hand, is the grand plan being drawn up back in the capital. It might use colonialism as a tool, sure, but it can also be about remote control, using financial power, cultural influence, or just the threat of military force. It's the deliberate quest for power on a global scale. So if you only remember one thing from this section, let it be this simple little phrase: imperialism is the theory, and colonialism is the practice. But what happens when the flags come down and the colonizers supposedly go home? Does that whole system of control just evaporate into thin air? Well, not exactly. And this is where we get into the modern, often invisible legacy of colonialism. And that brings us to this term, neo-colonialism. Neo means new, right? So this is like a new form of colonialism. It describes the situation where a country is politically independent on paper, it has its own flag, its own government, but its economy, and often its culture, is still deeply dominated by its former colonizer or other global superpowers. So how does this actually play out? Well, it usually starts with decolonization. A country celebrates its freedom, but the economic strings are still attached. The control just shifts. It's no longer about governors and armies. Now it's exerted through much more subtle things, like foreign aid that comes with conditions, or trade rules that are totally unfair, or even policies dictated by powerful groups like the World Bank. It's a switch from direct political rule to indirect economic control. This leads us right into another one of these key terms. If the end of direct colonial rule isn't really a clean break, then what does the post in post-colonial even mean? Does it just mean over? Yeah, it's not that simple. Post-coloniality doesn't mean we're in a world that's free from colonialism's impact. Not at all. Instead, it describes the condition of living in its aftermath. It's the incredibly complex reality for countries that are trying to figure out who they are while grappling with the massive economic, political, and cultural baggage left behind by their former colonizers. And this condition is, well, it's messy. As the scholar Helen Gilbert puts it, the word post-colonial can point to a bunch of different things all at once. It could be about actively resisting that lingering foreign influence. It could be about that awkward, difficult process of building a new national identity. Or it could even be about how these supposedly new nations get sucked right back into the very same Western-dominated economic systems. Okay, so if post-coloniality is this ongoing, complex, lived condition, that begs a pretty big question. How in the world do we even begin to study it? How do we analyze it and make sense of all its deep-seated effects? And that, my friends, brings us to our final term, post-colonialism. And I want you to notice that little ism at the end. That's a huge clue that we're now talking about a system of thought, a way of looking at the world. And here is the absolute key distinction. Post-colonialism is the condition of living in the wake of colonialism. Post-colonialism is the theoretical toolkit we use to study that condition. It's a field of study, a way of analyzing history, literature, politics, to uncover and understand the power dynamics that were set up in the colonial era and are still with us today. So, what's in this toolkit? What does this kind of theory actually do? Well, it helps us ask some really deep questions, like how did colonial powers portray the people they ruled in books and art to justify their own actions? It digs into the psychological damage done to both the colonizer and the colonized. And so importantly, it shined a light on all the ways people fought back and resisted, reclaiming their own stories and their own voices. So, when you boil it all down, post-colonialism isn't just about looking backwards. It's a powerful lens for understanding the here and now. It helps us see and question the power imbalances and cultural assumptions that are the direct inheritance of that colonial past. And that leaves us with a final thought, a challenge really. Now that you have these concepts, colonialism, neo-colonialism,